Hello everyone, my name is ET and this is D&D with ET. I'm here today to talk to you about this very strange adaptation of the Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth, the classic Gygax adventure from 2nd edition. And it's the crux of the issue here is that the 5th edition remake recommends 9th level player characters. The original adventure recommends 6th level player characters, and I personally, with very little adaptation, conversion, I ran this adventure from the original adventure module for 3rd level characters. That's right, a 5th edition party of 3rd level characters was able to take on this classic adventure, and they haven't really changed anything. They haven't, and then they shoot it up to 9th level, and it's just wild to me, right? It's almost like you're walking through a house that has been childproofed, and you know all the sharp edges have these rubber covers on them, and all the PowerPoints are covered up so you can't stick a fork in there. And it's almost like the 5th edition adaptation is really taking the teeth out of it. There's nothing really deadly in here. They've removed a lot of the petrification and the paralysis. The other thing that was really changed is there's not as many magic items in this adventure. In the original one, it almost feels like there's multiple in every single room that you can loot, and there's not even half as many in the new adaptation, and it sort of leads to this feeling that they've swapped the magic items that you could get for the player levels that they start with. And I mean, just thinking about some of the wizard spells that you can have at 9th level, like Pass Wall or Wall of Force, like what are any of these creatures going to do against a Wall of Force or a Pass Wall? You can walk straight through all of the walls in this adventure, straight to the boss room. In fact, I think you might be able to go below the floor of the boss room and skip everything. Right? And like there's some Zorn in this adventure, and their signature ability is Pass Wall at will. They can just meld in and out of the cave walls, and the wizard can also do that now at 9th level. It just feels wrong to me. I've gone through and I've marked out sort of what's been changed, what is a combat encounter, what is a roleplay encounter, what is a trap. And it might surprise you guys, but this Gygax adventure only has, the original didn't have a single trap in it. Not a single one. Unless you count all the ambush predators, there's no traps. And there's arguably one friendly NPC in the whole dungeon, and the rest just want to kill you. So in this video, I'm going to sort of go through these things, and I'm going to show you the things I changed to make a little bit more roleplay into this adventure, but also to understand which parts of this adventure are the deadliest parts, which parts your players need to take seriously. Your players can really feel like this is the lair of a 20th level witch or of Tasha, right? Like that's what this is. The first room of this adventure is about 6 or 7 different talking heads, and they're all arguing about which way is the right way, my way is the right way. But the way that is the right way, the one that supposedly tells the truth, doesn't necessarily say the right way. Like the most direct route to the boss room is what you'd presume the right way would be. That's not the case. I'm not really sure what Gygax was thinking with this one. Hey, this is ET from the future, and it occurred to me whilst editing this video that this whole puzzle is actually a pun. The talking heads send you on the right way, as in a right turn, when actually the correct way, which is the most direct route to the boss room, is a left turn. So groups are sent on a massive red herring throughout the rest of the dungeon if they did not realize it was a pun all along. And I certainly have been fooled as the dungeon master twice by this now. So, well played, Gygax. I ran this for 5th edition at a club and again for Shadow Dark at a home group. And yeah, I fell for it both times, hook, line and sinker. So yeah, well played. The second encounter I really want to highlight because it's a fantastic encounter. It's the clay golem, and this monster by design, it's like a juggernaut. It doesn't take damage from almost anything. It has all these immunities, and the only clue to its weakness is this magic dagger or a magic longsword that is stuck into its chest. And because it's a magic weapon, it's actually been able to pierce the clay golem's flesh. And that's a clue to your party of what the weakness of this clay golem is, and it's also a reward for your party to defeat this golem, or even to pull out the sword mid-combat, right? But this clay golem in the original adventure was way stronger. It could cast haste on itself for 3 rounds when it saw the party. So it would gun at you at 50,000 miles an hour, and then it gets 2 attacks off, right? And it doesn't take damage. So it's a really nuisance of an encounter. And my groups have had to run across the whole dungeon just to escape from this thing because they didn't quite have the tools to defeat it, or the damage types to defeat it properly. There's no wandering monster table for this tournament play version, and that's partly because the party's not allowed to long rest in tournament play. But if you're looking to use this adventure, and I don't think they're going to change much with the Infinite Staircase, if you're looking to just use this dungeon, there's nothing stopping your players from resting here, and just taking everything at full power in this dungeon. Even the original adventure, the Wandering Monster Table wasn't really that strong. And I mean, to tell you from experience, to stop your players long resting inside a dungeon, the wandering monsters need to be scary. They need to be, as strong as the boss, or they need to be like rust monsters or black puddings or something like this that really makes your party not want to rest because they might have their weapons rusted overnight while they were sleeping, right? So my suggestion is to make this clay golem a wandering monster. Have it just juggernauting throughout this dungeon, at least wherever it can get to hunt the party down and stop them from resting. They can't rest for 8 hours if this clay golem is walking around. They have to retreat out of the dungeon. Now, my players in this game were actually disappointed on the lack of traps in this dungeon, because Gygax's reputation with the Tomb of Horrors is that he has a lot of traps in his adventures and they're all deadly. And there's not really much of that at all in this cave system. But what there is an abundance of is ambush predators. You have cave morays, you have cloakers, you have venomous bats, you have sealing slime. And there's an interesting dynamic between these ambush predators that are lurking in the darkness here to the really strong, quite often sturdy monsters that your party will have to face and may have to run away from, because the best, most tactical way of playing these ambush predators is if your party is injured or if there's a straggler in the party, then your ambush predators are suddenly a lot more deadly and they're a lot more capable of dealing some real damage to your party. Because if your party are rested, full health, and all 4 or 5 of them walk past the cave morays and the 12 cave morays all come out all at once, well, they're going to get fireballed, they're going to get kited, and nothing's going to happen. But if your players have, just made it out of the water, perhaps they're escaping from the chul or something like this, then the first person onto the land is suddenly going to get attacked by all these cave morays because they're alone. And that's how you want to use these ambush predators. You want to wait until your party is weak or alone and then you ambush them. There is one exception to these standard ambush predators, and it is the acidic slime. So this is a really well designed encounter because there's a hook, which is this dead adventurer in the center of this cave tunnel, and he had his flesh eaten away, almost it looks like acid ate away his flesh, and he's wearing braces of defense as well as a magic weapon or two, but those are sort of his only clothes that didn't get eaten away by this acid. And your players are going to be looking at this and they're going to be a bit suspicious, but they're going to want that loot. But the smart players will look up and they will see 6 acidic slime on the ceiling. Now, these slime can be really deadly because for 0 movement, they can drop down onto a party member and fully engulf them in acid. And that's scary. So I really want you to sort of have this be a bit of a slow burn, describe the darkness, describe the dead adventurer and how unusual they look, and let your players sort of be the first victim of a horror movie when they look up and they see the slime falling on top of them. So that's sort of the traps of the dungeon. If we go over to the roleplay of the dungeon, there's really not much here. The pecs at the very beginning of the dungeon are literally the only friendly NPC in this whole thing. And they are only friendly if your players put out the light source upon meeting them. And the pecs are just sort of doing their own thing. They're there to provide a way to unpetrify your player characters if they do get petrified by the Gorgon Chimera or the Basilisk. But otherwise, these pecs are just digging their own tunnel and it's kind of just random. So what I suggest is that these pecs are the ones who built this dungeon for Tasha in the first place. Okay, because that's a really evocative image, right? Like, this isn't just any random cave that this witch picked. She hired these pecs to dig her a dungeon. They designed and dug this thing themselves, and they're in the middle of digging a new tunnel and a new level of this dungeon. That's really cool, and it gives these pecs a history and a reason to be here. So even if they don't have many motivations beyond that, it's still a cool thing to trivia about. There is one other suggestion that I would suggest, but your mileage may vary, because the trolls are a humanoid that your players will meet in this dungeon, and they are conversable. There's a lot of monsters that are intelligent here, but not many of them are humanoid and look conversable and look like your players might want to parlay with them. And these trolls are that, right? So these trolls have actually been living off the mushrooms, so they're not necessarily wanting to eat your players. Maybe they're happy eating mushrooms. But in my version of this dungeon, the trolls are actually oppressed by the Fomorian giant that lives down the corridor. And these trolls once per month have to sacrifice one of their own to this Fomorian giant. And the Fomorian giant is really cruel because he breaks off their legs and then eats it like a drumstick, but then the troll regenerates its leg again, so he keeps sort of torturing these trolls that are tribute before finally killing them. It's a pretty gruesome sight, but these trolls, it's the day before they have to pick someone for tribute, and it's sort of like, well, how do we decide it's going to be random? Do we give him the elderly? You know, what's the system here? There's a bit of morality in that. But your party are going to get there and they may want to help these trolls out, which is kind of a funny situation to help the trolls. Or maybe the trolls want to capture a player character and offer the player character as a tribute to save themselves for a month. That could work. But yeah, so I give these trolls a relationship with the Fomorian giant, and they are oppressed, and the Fomorian giant is tyrannical. Just to come back to the entrance of the dungeon and where your players enter, I actually recommend your players go through the subterranean river to the lake instead of the main entrance to the dungeon, because especially if you're using the clay golem as wandering monster, you don't necessarily want them to just run into it in its lair, and the talking heads is kind of a weird puzzle. It's not really exciting, and your players can very easily just walk straight to the boss room from the main entrance of the dungeon. It's a very weird design, and that actually happened in one of my games. And so instead of the main entrance, if the main entrance, you know, has a cave in and is just inaccessible, and your players are forced to swim or raft down this river, it puts them at an environmental disadvantage entering this dungeon, which is really important for giving your monsters a leg up at the start. They're also going to, the first few rooms that they're going to get are going to be ambush predators, or they're going to be really tough monsters to fight. My original group that ran through this adventure, they went through the river first, and they couldn't really get a good foothold in the dungeon because they went onto land and fought a monster, and they decided, oh no, this is too strong, we're not strong enough for this monster, and then they would retreat, and they really had to work hard just to get themselves into the dungeon. And it was a really satisfying experience for them, I think, because every time they would go into the water, they'd have all these monsters from the water trying to grapple them and drag them down and drown them. And they really had to work together just to get to solid ground without getting eaten. So I really, really recommend starting your players through the river instead of the main entrance to the dungeon. And just on the lake, they actually cut out the snapping turtle that lives at the bottom of this lake. And I really liked the snapping turtle because it could actually attack the boat that your players are on, and your players would need to defend the boat from the turtle. So that's just my recommendation, but otherwise they changed the piercers to chul, which I actually like that change because the chul are grapplers. They grapple your party and drag them underwater instead of attacking your party's hit points. So definitely familiarize yourself with the drowning rules of 5th edition if you're going to do that. But yeah, consider starting the party down this alternative entrance to the dungeon. This earth genie, this Tao that has set up a table of a feast and is sort of partying, pretending to party here, it's a very random encounter, and there's no way any party are going to fall for this trick, right? Like his table of illusion foods that are actually poison. It's a room that's in the middle of a cave filled with deadly monsters. There's not a single person that is going to fall for this encounter. However, this genie is really, really strong, right? Like, it has some really powerful spells, and especially if it can catch your players in some of its illusions, it can really do a hard number on your party. But in the original adventure, there were so many more magic items that had a lot of open-ended creative uses for the party to use. And I had one player trick this Dao into eating a bead of force. Okay? So, you know, when you eat a bead of force, you're not going to have very good constipation for the rest of the day, all right? So, you know, that's a part of the original appeal of this adventure, is your parties can have crazy ideas of what to do with these magic items. And finally, the Gorgon Chimera, the boss of this level of the dungeon. This is the reason I made this video, okay? Because in the remake, they replaced it with a lizard up here, like the most average thing ever. It was a Gorgon Chimera, okay? Like, okay, this is the first time I read through this adventure. I read the word Gorgon Chimera, and my imagination lit up. Okay, it was a revelation of a moment for me, and you know, I don't run it with, you know, a bull head for the Gorgon, right? The 5th edition Gorgon is like a bull or something. No, no player knows of this Gorgon bull. That's not in our cultural mythology of what a Gorgon is. When I think of a Gorgon, I think of a Medusa head. Okay, so this is a chimera with the 3rd head of a Medusa. And what you can do is you can roleplay these heads off of each other. So the goat is very stubborn, of course, but he's also a vegetarian. So he's a bit more peaceful, and he doesn't want to attack the party unless he has to, and he's much more parlayable than, for example, the dragon, that's extremely aggressive and wants to just roast the party with its fire breath, and is obsessed with being the best guard for Tasha's lair that it can be. And then the Medusa head, she's much more shy, and she's sort of embarrassed by her powers and by her ugliness, and she's best friends with Tasha, actually, and she wants to be reunited with her, and she's feeling really heartbroken that Tasha hasn't shown up in, you know, 2,000 years or however long it's been. She's really heartbroken and lonely. So all these different heads, you play them off each other, and your party is going to negotiate the heads against each other because they all share the same body. So it's a best out of 3 vote for what the body does. And yeah, this Gorgon Chimera, it's my favorite thing in this adventure, and I implore you to add it back in. And the rest of the dungeon, it's actually all building up to a Gorgon Chimera, right? That's why there's so many earth elementals. That's why there's so many ways of dealing with petrification. In the original adventure, there was also a spell scroll of stone to flesh in the cockatrices layer, which is now the basilisk layer, but that's whatever. But you know, it's foreshadowing and building up to this petrification boss fight that your players are going to have to deal with. And I can't believe they cut it. Okay, Gorgon Chimera, just swap out a Chimera's lion head for that of a Medusa with petrification, and it'll be beautiful, okay? It'll be really deadly, but your players will remember it, and that's the important part. Okay, so that just about does it for the adventure walkthrough of the Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth. I'm probably going to do the Wolves of Welton next, because I just think that's such a masterpiece of a one-shot. I cannot think of a better formatted one-shot. But anyway, let me know what you thought of this video. Like, comment, and subscribe. The channel's still really new, so all that stuff helps out a lot. But otherwise, this is D&D with ET signing out. Thanks for watching.